Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Today, it's been a while since I've done a true beginner project, so I thought I would do something for the beginners out there. Um, I've picked out a couple of pieces of nuggety looking turquoise, and I thought I'd make a pair of turquoise post earrings out of them. It'd be a pretty easy project for someone who's just getting started, and I think it might produce some attractive earrings. So we'll give it a shot and see how it turns out. But I definitely think this will be in the beginner category, so check it out. If you're more advanced, make sure to visit my main YouTube channel page because there's tons of content over there and lots of more advanced projects too. So before we start though, I wanted to thank some groups of people. My patrons over on Patreon are my core group of supporters. Not only do they provide financial support to me, they also have created a really nice environment over there with a lot of really knowledgeable and cool people that I can interact with. So thank you for that, and thank you for your support in general. The other group is my YouTube subscribers, and we're getting real close to 23,000 subscribers. 22,950 some was what the last number was about when I checked last time. So thank you for that. Thank you for all the nice comments, and I do also appreciate the contributions like the buy me a coffees, the super thanks, the buying my merch or my ebooks. That stuff really helps to make my channel sustainable and allows me to continue making these videos. So thank you for that. All right, well, let's get started on these earrings. This is one of my design idea sketchbooks that are available on my merch store. This particular one has a gauge to inches to millimeter conversion chart on the back, which I find pretty useful. What I really like about these though is the dot matrix on the pages in the background. It's kind of subtle, but it provides a graph sort of paper that allows me to draw better sketches. So I find it pretty useful. I'm not terribly good at freehand drawing stuff, so as you might notice when you look at my drawings today. But it does help, so get yourself one of those. I think they're really useful. Alright, so I thought it was time to do kind of a beginner project and hopefully meet some needs of some people who are new to this. I have a tendency to do some fancy prong settings and stuff like that, and so I wanted to get back to something basic today. So I picked out a couple of pieces of turquoise. These ones are the kind that are kind of nuggety on the top. Color-wise, they kind of look like Sleeping Beauty or something like that, but I'm not sure where these ones are from, so maybe somebody would know. Something you should know about stones that are like this, these ones are backed, and a lot of times people who are cutting stuff that is a little bit fragile will put a backing on it to reinforce it. One thing you should know about buying stones like this is that if you're buying by the carat or something, you're paying for a lot of backing on it if they're selling it by weight, so you might want to consider that when you're buying them. But some stones do require a little bit of backing, and I'm okay using them for something like stud earrings. It's no big deal with that. So my plan here is I'm going to do something relatively simple, and I think what I'll do is I'll make a circle out of a 16 gauge round wire, which is 1.3 millimeters. I have a little bit of that right here, and we'll make two circles actually about this size to be kind of a border on these little studs, and we'll make a bezel for the stones out of some fine silver that's 26 gauge, which is 0.41 millimeters. I use really tall bezel, this stuff which is 3/16 inch high or 4.76 millimeters. But I generally file it down until it's a little bit shorter depending upon the needs of the particular stone, and we'll do that today as well. I may oxidize the area around this after we solder it all together and get the stone set, just to kind of bring out the contrast between the silver and the blue turquoise, which I think is a real pretty look. And overall the whole thing is going to be soldered down onto some 26 gauge sheet, which is a relatively thin sheet, but we don't really need something that's super strong for this because it's not going to be in a really high kind of area where it's going to flex a lot or anything like that. Stud earrings don't get a lot of abuse usually. The post is going to be 20 gauge round wire, which is 0.8 millimeters, I think, and we'll solder that on towards the end, and then we'll pickle them and we'll set the stones after everything's all polished and cleaned up. So Alright, well I think the first thing we should do is make some bezels for these stones, and then we'll make the rings, and then we'll start assembling them. So these are not exact matches, which is fine. They're supposed to look kind of rough on these ones. We'll start. Just going to file the end flat here. If you want to, and you have one, you can use your miter vise jig for this. Miter vise jigs are kind of handy. I don't use them for this kind of stuff usually, but as a beginner I would have really loved it because you can get a pretty straight edge on it. I've gotten to where I can get them pretty straight just by eyeballing them. If you're new to this, sometimes that helps. Alright, so one of the things I do when I'm making a bezel for something that's not perfectly round is I'll start by using my pliers to kind of match it up to one of the sides there like that. And once we get it kind of started and I can put my finger against it like that, I can start to wrap it around like that. I'm going to use my pliers to kind of squeeze here and there to make sure we get all of the space out of there away from the stone. We want it to fit in there nicely so it doesn't have a lot of extra space. So if you're new to this, you can get by with just a little bit of extra space there, but too much and then it becomes difficult to set the stone and it looks amateurish. So we want to get it relatively tight. Nobody wants people to say, "Wow, did you see Chad's jewelry? It looks really amateurish." I hope nobody says that. I suppose occasionally everybody makes something that looks a little amateurish, so I'm sure I do. But alright, so I'll file the other side of that one in a second, but let's flatten this back out and we'll file it again for the second one. Years ago when I first started doing this, bezels were a struggle for me because they took me a while to do because I hadn't quite mastered shaping wire and stuff. But over time, with practice, and after you've made 30 or 40 bezels, it starts to become pretty routine. I usually tell people make 30 bezels before you get too discouraged. By that time, usually people have kind of gotten the gist of it. I usually, when I measure the bezel, if I have it really tight around there, I'll add about an extra fingernail's width so that I have a little bit of room to file it flat. Because even if you cut it pretty straight, you still want to file it, because when you're cutting with these cutters, it's pinching the metal and creating kind of a chisel-shaped edge on it. And so when you put the two ends together like this, you keep trying to slip past each other because of that chiseled end. So you want to file it flat so they butt up against each other nicely. If that makes any sense. So after you've kind of gotten the hang of bezels, these are the sort of things you could probably crank out pretty fast. You know, with a lot of different kinds of stones. Change it up a little bit. kept these pretty simple just because sometimes simple is pretty, and I don't want to make anything too complex if it's going to be a beginner video here. If you're finding this useful and enjoying the video, it would be a great value to me if you would consider hitting the like button. That's how the algorithm finds and promotes your channel, so I appreciate that if you do that. Okay. So now I'm going to shape these, and we're going to solder the ends of the bezel together. So I'm going to set the stones over here for now so I don't lose track of them. I use primarily hard silver sheet solder, which has the highest melting temperature. It polishes up almost just like sterling silver, so it's harder to see your solder joints, which is kind of nice. I use liquid flux that I dribble on with a dropper bottle, and my torch is a Silversmith model. It's an acetylene air torch, so it doesn't have an oxygen tank. It just pulls in atmospheric air to mix with the gas in the nozzle here, and it produces a nice hot flame, not quite as hot as oxyacetylene, but definitely hotter than butane or propane. And I would say that this is a project that if you have one of those little butane portable torches, you could certainly do this project with that. You know, a lot of bigger things that I do, sometimes I tell people you might have trouble getting it hot enough to do the things you want it to do with a bigger piece. And that's really the limitations on those torches, is how big of a piece you can do. Okay, so let's get these ends lined up together. I like to make it into an angular shape like this. That way, when I go to solder it, I can just lay a little piece of solder right on top, because it's relatively flat. You know, the other thing is, you noticed I pushed it past itself like this and then pulled it back. That's so that it gets it a little springy, so that when I pull it back and pop it into place, it's got some forward pressure pushing the two ends together. The reason I do that is because when you heat the metal, it relaxes a little bit as it's annealing, which is removing the work hardening that happens when you work it. It gets stiffer and stiffer. Let's try this again. So the reason you want it pushing together nicely is because under the heat, it's going to relax a little bit as far as its hardness and pull apart a bit. And so if it relaxes and pulls apart enough to where there's a gap there, solder doesn't like to fill in that gap. It doesn't like to jump gaps. It likes to run along nice close together seams. So if you have it pushing together hard enough, even if the metal relaxes under the heat, it's not going to separate. It'll just be a little bit not pushing together as hard, if that makes sense. So we'll have a better solder joint then. If you have a tendency to get solder joints where you have a crack on either side like that, that's usually what's going on, is you either didn't have it pushing together hard enough, or you're leaving the heat on there for too long, and it starts to kind of slump. You get that embarrassing bezel slump. Nobody wants that. Okay, I'm just going to put a little flux on there. We want to dry the flux. And you want to get it crusty. If it's not crusty, put a little bit more on there. Because what you're doing is you're coating the metal to protect it from reoxidizing under the heat. And that keeps it clean so that the solder will stick to it. Okay, so I'm going to heat it like this, kind of in a circle. So I want to get the whole thing hot, not just one side of it. So it puddles right and just right goes over that gap. If you have it jump into one side or the other, what's going on is the side that it's jumping to has reached the soldering temperature, but this side has not. So it just flows over to the side that's hot enough for it to stick to it, if that makes sense. So ideally you want to heat it evenly enough to where it jumps, or just kind of puddles right over the whole gap there and sticks to both sides. Flux it, and get your flux dried by crusting it up. There we go, nice and crusty. Oops. Sometimes these little crosslock insulated tweezers, the ends get a little bit gummed up with flux, and so you can't always pick up your pieces of solder. I periodically file them flat again and clean them a little bit. That way you have a little easier time picking stuff up. Alright, let's grab those stones and then we can shape these. I usually use the tips of my chain nose pliers to pinch out the sharp corners. You know, once we get it sort of not too many like square angles anymore, 90-degree angles, then we can start thinking about the actual shape of the stone and start steering it in that direction. So I'm going to put the solder joint on the longer side so I don't have to bend it as sharply, because that's always a little bit stiffer part. It's pretty well shaped on the bottom, so if I just kind of mirror that on the top now. So we're going to be soldering this down to a base sheet, and if I want to make sure, since these are not symmetrically shaped, I don't want to accidentally solder my bezel on upside down. So I'm going to mark the bottom so I don't lose track of that. So that'll be the bottom side right there where the black mark is. That way I won't accidentally do that and then have to start over. I think after you've done this for a while, almost everybody's done that once or twice. Just because you're just rushing through and making a bezel and you forget that it's not perfectly symmetrical. I was just looking on the ground for it. It's one of the ever-present issues of being a metalsmith is chasing stones around on the floor. I spend at least as much time crawling around on the floor as I do making jewelry. From what other people tell me, I am not alone in this problem. Alright. That's pretty good. Okay. So let's mark this as the bottom on this one here so I don't forget. We'll set those over here for now. And we need to make some little rings out of 16 gauge round wire. And maybe we can figure out kind of an estimate of how big these rings need to be. Wanted them to be this size, so let's measure the outside diameter of these. You can just eyeball it too if you want to, but I think let's go with 10 millimeters, 11, 12, 13, let's call it 14 millimeters. So 5 times diameter, what did I say, 14 millimeters? 4 times 4, 6, 9, 3, 4. 43.96 millimeters, so let's just call it 44 millimeters. I'll cut a couple pieces that length. Actually, let's cut them 45 just to be safe. I'd rather have just a little bit too much than not quite enough. Let's straighten them out to get a little bit more accurate measurement. Your straightening wire, I find it most of the time the best luck that I have is when I'm using my flat nose pliers to hold the wire. Some people will take their wire and roll it between two really smooth flat surfaces like 2 bench blocks. That works too. It has a tendency to work harden things a little bit. And sometimes, if your bench block is rough like mine, it may beat up the wire a little bit. So you need to make sure it's really smooth. 2 pieces of hardwood might work pretty well. file this other end flat again so we get a closer to an exact measurement, I should say. I remember when I first started doing this, how you just get sucked into what you're doing and kind of lose yourself in the process. That's so nice when you can find that. Oftentimes when I have a plan that I'm following, I can't, escape into my mind. But I still occasionally do when I'm doing this, even on video. So if I don't talk for a really long time on the video, that's probably what happened. I just got absorbed in the process. Get these about the same length. I guess it doesn't matter until we cut them off to exactly the right length. Alright, so let's do this. Okay, I've tried to get it pretty close to round there, and we'll slide it down here. Let's check to see where we're at. We're actually pretty close there. I like to start it small up here and have the two ends overlapping like that. Get it round and then push it up to the size you want. And you want to get it to where it drops right to the size. But that's pretty close right there, so I'm just going to probably, we'll cut that about right there. So when I trace these stones here, I didn't count in the bezel, so I may want to make them just a tiny bit bigger than this. We'll see. The good thing is something this thin you can stretch on a mandrel pretty easily. So now let's get those two ends lined up. I'm going to flatten them out a little bit like that so that they're pushing straight together, and then once they're soldered we can re-round them out. Do my best not to catch my notebook on fire. I've done that for a while. I keep meaning to make myself one of those things you see in workshops. Sometimes they say it's been 0 days since there was an industrial accident or something, or 0 days since anyone was injured on the job. I want one that says it's been 0 days since Chad lit his notebook on fire. I think that would be funny. There you go. That leaves just a little gap around there, which I kind of want. So does that one. So those will be nice little earrings. We should call them bullseye earrings because they got like a center point but then a little circle around them. Be more accurate if you had multiple circles, probably, I suppose. Okay, so let's make a second one of those. I had a nice chat with some of my patrons last night via live stream. It's kind of fun having people to talk with about jewelry from different places in the world. I've got a lot of US, a lot of Canadian. I have Norwegian, Australian, Spanish. I think I have a Spanish patron. So people from all around the world, it's kind of neat to New Zealand. It's kind of neat to get to chat with people from different parts of the world. Next thing, since we're going to solder these down to some sheet, I want to make sure they're nice and flat. So I'm going to kind of manually flatten them this way just by looking at them from the side and using my flat nose pliers. Alright, so here's what I think we should do next. I think let's cut some pieces of 26 gauge sheet. I want to leave a little bit excess on the outside so I have plenty of area to focus that heat on. And I also want some space out there because I really don't want a lot of solder overflow into the space in between here, because I may oxidize these with some stuff. I use silver black, or sometimes I use some liver of sulfur concentrate. But making the area around the stone black really sets things off nicely. But if you have a lot of solder in there, it's not going to oxidize evenly, so I'm going to try and avoid having much solder in there. So what that means for us is let's lean the solder on the outside of this, and then when we put the bezel in there, we're going to put the solder on the inside of the bezel so it doesn't flow much into the outer area, if that makes sense. So let's cut it and leave ourselves a little bit of room. There's one. Let's do it right there. I'm just going to cut off this little piece here because that's just extra mass that's going to make it take longer to get hot. So one of the things a lot of people as beginners struggle with is when you're soldering something on top of something else like this, the top piece gets hot really easily because the flame is directly hitting it and it's kind of perched up on top of things. The piece of sheet underneath there is a little bit harder to get up to temperature, and ideally when you're trying to get solder to stick two pieces together, you need them both to get to that solder flow point, which in the case of hard silver solder like I use is about 1450 degrees Fahrenheit. And I used to know the centigrade or Celsius temperature. I probably could find out for you. Okay, so let's flux those, and then we're going to put a little bit of solder touching the outside and the sheet, and we're going to do some strategies to make sure that the sheet gets up to temperature at about the same time as the ring does. So let me cut a little more solder. I'm not too concerned about using big chunks of solder because I'm going to be trimming off the excess sheet out here anyway, so any flow mess that's out there is going to be cut off, so that shouldn't be a big deal. Some strategies that people use sometimes to get the sheet hot without melting stuff that's on top of it is to get the flame to be hitting the sheet from the bottom. And you can do that in a few ways. One way is to get one of those tripods with a screen that some people use for soldering on. You can get your flame directly underneath the piece then. That's one way. When you're getting, after you get your solder positioned, if you tilt it up a little bit with a soldering pick or with your tweezers, you can heat from below like that without things sliding off if you don't tip it up too high. And the other way is just experience and learning how to direct the heat to get the whole thing hot at about the same time, which comes with a little bit of practice, which you are certainly capable of achieving. Okay, so one more on here. So normally I put these on while I have the torch on it because it keeps that flux in a kind of a gooey stage, and that way your solder kind of sticks down. Now, I prefer these to be leaning against there a little bit. Oops, I need to tip that up. But if they're at least touching, you're probably fine. So now, like I said, we're going to control where the I'm trying to penetrate that sheet with the flame the wire on top of it's going to get hot enough just by being in the path of the flame. So if you don't get the sheet hot enough, what will happen is called a cold solder joint. And that's where it looks like it flowed onto both pieces and made them adhere, but one of the pieces didn't quite get there, and so it just kind of flowed over the surface and didn't really stick. And then the solder joint will just break almost immediately. It's not even really a solder joint, it's just solder stuck to one side. So it's important that you get both pieces up to that soldering temperature, otherwise you'll have things breaking all the time. Okay, I'm going to let these clean up a little bit in the pickle for a few minutes just to get rid of some of the gummed up stuff on there. And then we can go ahead and solder those bezels on. Okay, let those pickle for a while. I think they turned out okay. Let's see if we can get these kind of nicely placed. Like I said, I don't want a huge amount of solder mess to flow to the outside. And so let's flux it on the inside here. Just a little bit of flux. I'm going to dry this kind of in stages so it doesn't bubble and move the thing around too much. If you feel like you need to, you can put a little bit more on the other side, but as long as we have a nice flat surface, it should wick right along that seam once it flows, as long as we have everything hot. So you just want to make sure you got a seam all the way around. I might throw just a little bit more in this one, just to make sure. I wasn't 100% sure that I had a seam on this side. Usually you can see a little bit of shininess. And over in this corner here, I didn't really see much shininess. So. I think we got it. Okay, so let's cool those off. Everything always looks a little goobery at this stage. It's always amazing when you're done that it cleans up and looks really nice. So I'm going to trim off the excess sheet around the circle here now, since it appears that we got a decent solder joint. These are Fisker's craft shears. They're pretty widely available, and they're cheap and easy to use for thinner sheet. You can cut up to about 18 gauge with these, but it wears them out pretty quickly because they're not really designed to do that. So this round wire that we soldered as a border, and you wouldn't have to use round wire, you could use square wire if you wanted a different look. Since it's a cylinder like this from the side, you can taper this under when we file this edge so that it kind of just merges right in. So I cut off the excess, and then I just used my single cut bastard file. Just kind of bevel it under, just slightly. You don't want to get too crazy here. Okay, so we got kind of just a nice little bevel under there. Let's do the same thing on this one. There's always the customer who likes just simple posts, and I make a lot of elaborate earrings, and sometimes I probably miss this particular demographic who likes this, but I kind of like making dangly earrings. So. One thing I do find a little challenging when I'm making little post earrings is during the polishing process. And I do have a polishing video, so I'll put a link up there. It's actually one of the very first videos I did, so the editing and the filming is a little bit crude, and the sound probably, so forgive my unpolished early videos, but the information is useful, I think, and still relevant. I'll eventually remake that video and shoot it a little better and get a little better organized and have better sound. Most standard ear wires are 20 gauge, and I have a little bit of 20 gauge here, so I'm going to cut a couple of pieces of these. A couple pieces off of this, I should say. Chad's having trouble with his words today. So I'm cutting these a lot longer than they're going to need to be, but one of the things you can do to make it easier to polish these is to have a long ear wire on it to hold on to, kind of. That gives you a little extra thing to grip. But then we'll cut it off after we're done polishing. So I filed the end flat here, and I have a few pieces of solder on the pad here. So let's get everything fluxed and put these ear wires on. So let's get this fluxed on the end of the wire. But let's go ahead and pick up some solder on the end of this. So I'm just going to set it on top of a piece of solder and heat the wire a little bit. Now there's not much mass in these wires, so it's pretty easy to melt them if you get them too hot. So really keep the heat moving when you do that. And the trick to putting this on here is we need to heat this earring up until it's about at the soldering temperature, and not really put the heat on here because there's so little mass in this, it's easy to melt that before this ever reaches temperature. So let's focus on that. And when you think you're pretty close, set it down there until that puddles like that, and then keep a hold of it until it solidifies. So if you ever have an idea for a video, I always appreciate that kind of input too, so feel free to leave things like that in the comments. Or I like hearing how people do things, because everybody's got their own kind of methods for stuff, and it's fun to learn. There's nothing wrong with doing things differently, in my opinion. So if you do things a little different than some, it's okay, I do too. I caught a little flack when I first started my YouTube channel from some people who were very traditional about everything. And I personally value when people do things differently, because sometimes it shows you an easier way or a different method that might be just as effective or better. You know? I'm going to pickle these now for half an hour, 45 minutes, and then I'll polish them. Once I'm done polishing, we can go ahead and set those stones, but one other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bend this over a little bit. When we soldered this on, it annealed the metal to it's in a really soft state now, and you want your ear wire to be a little bit, your ear post to be a little bit stiff. So if we twist it a few times, that'll work harden it along its length and make it a little stiffer, which is, I think, you just got to be careful not to overdo it and twist it too many times till you twist it right off. Hopefully we won't do that, but let's throw these in the pickle for now, and I'll be back in a few. I shined them up, and then I used an oxidizing agent to darken the insides there. And now I'm going to go ahead and set these stones. I did one of them already, like this. And then I'll show you how to finish off the earring. So I put a little bit of tag board in the back. I use tag board, which is like the stuff you find on the backs of legal pads. A lot of people use sawdust. I've heard some other unusual things that people use for that. The most notable being like cut up credit cards. But that thing that you want if you're going to back a stone like this is you want a little bit of compressibility so that you can push the stone in there pretty hard. Okay, if you need to on these ones, like this stone drops down a little bit on this side, so I might actually take a file here, lower that edge just a little bit. And I do this a little differently than some. I use the flat side of my chain nose pliers as a bezel pusher. So if you need to hook this into a ring vise or something like that to hold on to it, that's fine. Or brace it against something when you're doing this. I'm just pushing this bezel in up against the stone hard as I can. The last step as far as setting the stone is I'm going to use the rounded outer part of this to burnish it. Just to rub that top edge right where the stone and the silver meet. And then the last thing, like I said earlier, is to work hard in this ear wire. And so I'm just going to, see how I bent it over like that? I'm just going to take this and gently twist it a few times. What that does is that twists the entire length of that wire, which causes the metal to get harder and harder. Just don't want to overdo it. Okay, and then like I said, I think I did 12 millimeters on this one. So if I just hold it like that. Or like that. Or you can actually measure it. But what's the fun of that, right? So they make little cup burrs you can put on your rotary tool to smooth these ends out a little bit. I've misplaced mine right now, so I'm just going to use my little half-round jeweler's file. And then I usually, if you've noticed on store-bought earrings, there's usually a little notch right here to catch your ear nut. So if you just gently with your wire cutters kind of grab it and don't squeeze very hard, and spin this thing in there, it'll cut a little groove in there to catch the ear nut. I usually recommend people use those rubber ear nuts instead of the metal ones because they hold on to the mesh. So there we go. I'll get some better pictures and put them at the end. Tell me what you think. What would you have changed? What would you do differently? Okay, well that was the beginner project turquoise stud earrings. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you go. And I'd love it if you'd head over to my main channel page on YouTube and check out some of my other videos. I have over 500 now. And there's all different levels of videos. So if you're a more advanced person, you might find some interesting projects over there, as well as if you're a beginner and anywhere in between. So check those out, watch a few, make sure to subscribe to my channel if you'd like. I'd love to have you as a follower, and I do put out 3 videos per week, one on Tuesday, one on Thursday, and one on Saturday. So you have constantly new content coming out. So I think you'll find that it's an active channel with a lot of content. Before you leave, make sure to hit the video description down below. There's some important links there if you're interested in finding out about my Patreon, which includes multiple tiers of membership, the lowest one being where you get the videos without any kind of advertising in them. So that's kind of nice. You can avoid the YouTube advertising. The other levels above that include extra benefits, as well as supporting my work. We do live streams now and again. I do exclusive video tutorials almost every week for that group. So there's a lot of different options for that. So check it out. I'd love to have you over on Patreon as well. There's a link to my merch store if you want to get yourself one of those nice design idea sketchbooks that I showed you at the beginning. I find them to be super useful and a great way to keep track of my projects. And there's a link to my ebooks if you want to get a nice guide to each of the year's videos that I've done so far. I've got 2023 and 2024. At the end of the year, I'll be doing 2025s. So what the ebooks are is it gives you an electronic book file with a page for each of the videos I did during that year, with a link to the video and extra information, including a picture of my sketch, a picture of the final product, a list of materials, a difficulty rating, and some notes I made about the project above and beyond what I talk about in the video. Whether I would do it differently if I was to do it again. Did I learn something important by doing that video? Stuff like that. I think it's a really useful tool. It puts a whole bunch of projects right at your fingertips and is a really nice way to support my channel. So check those out. Maybe get yourself one. Alright, well, thanks for watching. Take care. Happy silversmithing.